The amber sky of Velanthar Prime had always been beautiful. For 10,000 years, the people of the Corvani Collective had looked up at that golden glow and felt safe. Their cities floated on platforms that defied gravity. Their children played in gardens that stretched across entire continents. Their scientists had unlocked secrets of the universe that other species could only dream about. But today, the amber sky was burning. Elder Matriarch Cyril stood at the great window of the council chamber, her silver skin reflecting the flames that consumed the horizon. She was old, even by Corvani standards. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched stars die and new ones be born. In all her centuries of life, she had never felt fear like this. The Vethkai had come. They called themselves the Devouring Swarm, and the name was not an exaggeration. They were insects, but not like any insects Cyril had ever seen. Each one stood as tall as a Corvani adult. Their bodies were covered in black armor that seemed to absorb light itself. Their eyes, hundreds of them clustered on their heads, glowed with a sickly green color, and their mouths were filled with teeth designed for one purpose, only to consume. The Vethkai did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They did not enslave populations to work for them. They simply arrived at a world, stripped it of all life, and moved on to the next. 100 star systems had already fallen to them. 100 worlds, each with their own civilizations, their own histories, their own dreams, had been reduced to barren rocks floating in empty space. Now it was Velanthar's turn. Cyril watched as another explosion lit up the distant sky. That was the last of the orbital defense platforms, she knew. The massive stations that had protected her world for thousands of years had held out for 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting. 3 days of desperate resistance. And now they were gone. Behind her, the Council of Seven was in chaos. "We must evacuate," shouted Councilor Morik, his blue robe swirling as he paced back and forth. "We have ships. We can save some of our people." "And go where?" replied Councilor Harak, his voice tired and hollow. "The Vethkai have already surrounded the system. Any ship that tries to leave will be destroyed within minutes. Then we fight." Morik slammed his fist on the ancient wooden table. "We have weapons. We have soldiers. We make them pay for every inch of ground." Councilor Vela shook her head slowly. She was the youngest member of the council, barely 300 years old. "Our weapons are designed for defense, not war. Our soldiers are peacekeepers, not warriors. The Vethkai have conquered species far more powerful than us. What chance do we have?" The argument continued, but Cyril had stopped listening. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the sky burn. Somewhere out there, beyond the flames and the smoke, were 30 billion of her people. 30 billion souls, all of them waiting for their leaders to save them, and their leaders had nothing to offer but words. The distress signals had been sent out 5 days ago, the moment the Vethkai fleet had appeared at the edge of their system. Cyril had personally crafted the messages, carefully explaining the situation, begging for help. She had sent them to every known civilization in the galactic arm. The responses had all been the same. The Meridian Empire, rulers of 40 star systems, had replied first. "We grieve for your loss, but we cannot risk provoking the swarm. May your spirits find peace in the next realm." The Collective of Free Minds, a coalition of 12 species known for their wisdom and compassion, had been even more direct. "We have calculated the probability of successful intervention at less than 1%. We cannot sacrifice our own people for such odds. We will remember you in our histories." The Velanthari Union, a trading federation that had been their allies for 2,000 years, had not even bothered to respond. One by one, every door had closed. Every hope had died. The galaxy had looked at the Corvani and decided that they were not worth saving. Cyril understood in a cold and logical way. The Vethkai were too powerful. Any species that stood against them would be destroyed. It made no sense to die for a lost cause. The mathematics of survival demanded abandonment, but understanding did not make the pain any less. "There is one more option," said a quiet voice behind her. Cyril turned. Counselor Herrick had left the arguing group and now stood a few feet away. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. "We have contacted everyone," Cyril said. "No one will come. Not everyone." Herrick looked down at his feet, as if ashamed of what he was about to suggest. "We have not contacted the humans." The room went silent. Even the arguing counselors stopped and turned to stare at Herrick. "The humans?" Morrick's voice dripped with disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Humanity. The strange species from the far spiral arm. They had only achieved interstellar travel 300 years ago, a blink of an eye by galactic standards. Their technology was crude. Their ships were ugly, blocky things that looked like they had been welded together by children. Their lifespans were laughably short, barely a century if they were lucky. And their history was an endless record of violence. Cyril had studied humanity when they first appeared on the galactic stage. She had been curious about this new species that had emerged from an obscure little world called Earth. What she found had both fascinated and horrified her. Humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. They had invented war before they invented medicine. They had built weapons of mass destruction before they built stable governments. Their planet was scarred with the remnants of conflicts that made no sense. Wars fought over things as trivial as lines on a map or the words in a book. They were, by any reasonable definition, savages. "The humans are primitives," said Counselor Vila. "Their ships can barely cross between star systems. What could they possibly do against the Vethkai?" "Nothing," agreed Morrick. "They would be slaughtered, and then the swarm would have another target. No, contacting the humans would be worse than useless. It would be cruel. Then, what do you suggest?" Herrick's voice rose with sudden anger. "We sit here and wait to die? We watch our people be devoured while we debate the ethics of asking for help? There is no help to ask for." Morrick shouted back. "The humans cannot save us. No one can save us. We need to accept that. I will not accept it." Herrick turned to Cyril, his eyes desperate. "Matriarch, please. We have tried everyone else. What harm can one more message do?" Cyril looked at the old counselor. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that she felt in her own heart. He was grasping at straws, she knew. The humans were too far away, too weak, too primitive. Asking them for help was like asking a child to stop a storm. But still, she had visited Earth once many centuries ago. It had been a diplomatic mission, one of the first contacts between the Corvani and humanity. She had expected to find barbarians, creatures barely evolved beyond their animal ancestors. Instead, she had found something else entirely. The humans had welcomed her with warmth and curiosity. They had shown her their cities, their art, their music. They had introduced her to their children, who had looked at her silver skin with wonder rather than fear. And they had talked to her for hours, asking questions about the universe, about other species, about anything and everything. What struck her most was their passion. Everything the humans did, they did with an intensity that bordered on madness. They loved fiercely. They hated fiercely. They built and destroyed with equal enthusiasm. They were chaos given form, a species that seemed to run on pure emotion rather than logic. And there was something else she had noticed. Something in their eyes when they talked about protecting the things they cared about. The other species of the galaxy spoke of survival in careful, measured terms. They calculated risks and rewards. They made rational decisions based on probability and self-interest. But the humans spoke differently. They spoke of sacrifice. They spoke of duty. They spoke of something they called the right thing to do. At the time, Serail had dismissed it as naive idealism, the philosophy of a species too young to understand how the universe really worked. Now, standing in a burning world with no hope left, she wondered if she had been wrong. "Send the message," she said. The council erupted in protest, but Serail raised her hand for silence. Her authority as elder matriarch still meant something, even now. "I do not expect the humans to save us," she said. "But Councillor Herrick is right. We have nothing left to lose. If there is even the smallest chance that someone will answer, we must take it." The communications officer was summoned. The message was prepared. It was simple and direct, stripped of the formal language that usually marked Corvani diplomacy. "This is Elder Matriarch Cyril of the Corvani Collective. Our world is under attack by the Vethkai swarm. Our defenses have fallen. Our allies have abandoned us. 30 billion of our people face extinction. We ask for help. We beg for help. If anyone can hear this message, please come. Please." The message was sent. It would travel across 14,000 light-years of space, bouncing between communication relays, racing through the void at the speed of light. Even with the fastest relay network, it would take hours to reach human space. And even if the humans received it, even if they wanted to help, what could they do? Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. They were too far away and too small to make any difference. Cyril knew all of this. She knew that the message was pointless. She knew that sending it was an act of desperation, nothing more. But still, somewhere deep in her heart, a tiny flame of hope refused to die. The days that followed were the darkest of Cyril's long life. The outer colonies fell first. The agricultural stations that fed the planet. The mining outposts that provided raw materials. The small settlements that had existed for thousands of years. One by one, they went silent. The Vethkai did not hurry. They moved through the system with methodical precision, surrounding the planet, cutting off all escape routes. Their hive ships hung in the sky like dark clouds, blocking out the stars. Millions of smaller vessels swarmed around them like insects around a corpse. On the surface, the Corvani retreated to their citadels. These were the ancient fortresses that had been built in darker times, before the collective had achieved peace. They had been preserved as historical monuments, never meant to be used again. Now they were the last refuge for billions of terrified people. Cyril moved among them, trying to offer comfort where she could. She held the hands of dying soldiers. She sang lullabies to crying children. She listened to the prayers of those who had lost everything and had nothing left but faith. And every night, she stood at her window and watched the sky burn. The shields around the citadels were holding, but everyone knew they would not hold forever. The Vethkai were patient. They had all the time in the world. They simply surrounded each citadel and waited, wearing down the shields bit by bit, hour by hour. It was on the 7th day that the hope truly died. A young communications officer rushed into the council chamber, his face white with shock. "Matriarch," he gasped, "we have received responses to your message." For one brief moment, Cyril felt her heart leap. Then she saw the expression on the officer's face. "The Meridian Empire has officially condemned our request as reckless endangerment of galactic security," the officer said, reading from his screen. "They state that contacting the humans was an act of desperation that could provoke further Vethkai aggression. They recommend that we surrender peacefully and hope for mercy." "Mercy?" Councillor Viola laughed bitterly. The Vethkai do not know the meaning of the word. There is more. The officer swallowed hard. The collective of free minds has withdrawn their previous statement of sympathy. They say that by contacting the humans, we have shown poor judgment and cannot be trusted as partners in galactic affairs. Cyril closed her eyes. Even in their final hours, the galaxy was more concerned with politics than with saving lives. And the humans? She asked quietly. Have the humans responded? The officer shook his head. No, matriarch. There has been no response from human space. Of course there hadn't been. The message had probably arrived at some minor outpost, been reviewed by some junior officer, and been filed away as unimportant. Why would the humans risk anything for a species they had barely ever met? Why would they sacrifice their own people for strangers on the other side of the galaxy? Cyril had been foolish to hope. She could see that now. The universe was not a place of heroes and miracles. It was a cold, empty void where the strong consumed the weak, and no one came to save those who could not save themselves. Thank you, she said to the officer. You may go. The young man hesitated. Matriarch, there is something else. Something strange. What is it? Our long-range sensors detected an anomaly about an hour ago. A massive energy signature, unlike anything in our databases. It appeared briefly at the edge of human space and then vanished. Cyril frowned. What kind of anomaly? We do not know. Our scientists say it looked almost like a fold in space-time, but on a scale that should be impossible. They thought it might be a sensor malfunction, but what? The officer looked at her with something that might have been wonder. The anomaly was moving, matriarch. Moving very fast. And it was heading in our direction. Cyril stared at him. For a long moment, she could not speak. Then she walked to her window and looked up at the burning sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the flames and the smoke and the swarms of Vethkai ships, something was coming. Something that moved through space in ways that should not be possible. Something that was heading toward Valenthor Prime. She did not know what it was. She did not know if it would save them or destroy them. But for the first time in 7 days, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. And in the citadels below, 30 billion Corvani looked up at the sky and waited for a miracle they did not believe in. They did not know that the miracle was already on its way. Vasquez smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. And that is exactly why we have to go. Because no one else will. Because the galaxy has decided that those people are not worth saving. And we are going to prove them wrong. Kowalski stared at her for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. If I authorize this mission, and you fail, humanity loses its most powerful fleet. We lose our ability to defend ourselves. We become vulnerable to every threat in the galaxy. I know. If you succeed, you will have made enemies of half the galactic powers. They will see us as a threat. They will fear us. Let them. Kowalski opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked not like the supreme commander of all human forces, but like a tired old man carrying the weight of impossible decisions. You have always been stubborn, Helena. Even when we were young officers together, you never knew when to quit. It is one of my better qualities. A ghost of a smile crossed Kowalski's face. The Cascade Drive calculations will take at least 20 minutes to prepare. You will need to coordinate the jump precisely with all 600 ships. If even one ship is out of sync, the results could be catastrophic. Vasquez felt her heart begin to beat faster. Is that authorization, Admiral? It is against my better judgment. It goes against every protocol we have established. It is probably the most reckless decision I have ever made in my career. He paused. But yes, Helena, it is authorization. Go save those people. And try not to get yourself killed. The connection ended. For a moment, Vasquez stood in silence. Then she turned to face her bridge crew. "You heard the Admiral. We are going to Valenthor Prime. Commander Chun, begin the Cascade Drive preparations. I want all ships ready for jump in 20 minutes. Chun hesitated. "Admiral, the crew will need to be informed. They should know what they are getting into. I will tell them myself." She walked to the communications console and opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice would now be heard on every ship in the Armada, by every man and woman who served under her command. "All hands, this is Admiral Vasquez. In approximately 20 minutes, we will execute a full Armada cascade jump to the Valenthor system. Our mission is to engage and destroy a hostile force that outnumbers us 60 to 1. She paused, letting the words sink in. "I will not lie to you. Many of us will not survive this day. The enemy we face is powerful, numerous, and completely without mercy. They have destroyed 100 worlds and show no signs of stopping. By every rational measure, what we are about to do is madness." On the Prometheus, young Ensign Maria Santos gripped the edge of her console and tried to stop her hands from shaking. On the destroyer Defiant, Captain Yusuf Rahman closed his eyes and thought of his children back on Earth. On the cruiser Vigilance, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim looked at her crew and saw the same fear and determination that she felt in her own heart. "But somewhere out there," Vasquez continued, 14,000 light years from here, 30 billion innocent people are waiting to die. They have asked the galaxy for help. They have begged every species they could contact. And the galaxy has told them that no one will come." A voice hardened. "Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Not because it is easy. Not because we are guaranteed to win. But because it is the right thing to do. Because those people need help, and we are the only ones willing to give it. I am not ordering you to follow me. Any officer who wishes to stay behind may do so without shame. But for those of you who are willing to fight, who are willing to risk everything for people you have never met, I will be proud to stand beside you." She took a deep breath. "Prepare for Cascade. We have a war to win." The next 20 minutes were the most intense of Vasquez's career. The Cascade Drive calculations were incredibly complex, requiring precise coordination between all 600 ships. Engineers worked frantically to prepare the engines. Navigation officers double-checked and triple-checked their numbers. And throughout the fleet, men and women said goodbye to their loved ones, not knowing if they would ever speak again. Not a single ship requested to stay behind. When the preparations were complete, Vasquez stood at the front of her bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond them, on a world she had never seen, people were dying. She did not know if she could save them. She did not know if any of her people would survive. But she knew that she had to try. "All ships report ready for Cascade," Chun said. "Then let us go save some lives, Commander." Vasquez allowed herself one small smile. "Initiate Cascade Drive. Jump." The stars twisted. Space folded. Reality screamed. And 600 human warships vanished from the universe, hurtling across 14,000 light-years toward a destiny that none of them could imagine. The journey took exactly 4.7 seconds. It felt like eternity. 14,000 light-years away from the burning world of Valenthor Prime, Admiral Helena Vasquez was having a bad day. The coffee machine on the bridge of the UN's Prometheus was broken again. The navigation officer had made an error in the morning's course calculations that had added 2 hours to their patrol route. And the latest report from Earth Command was filled with the usual political nonsense about budget cuts and resource allocation. At 62 years old, Helena Vasquez had spent 4 decades in the United Earth Defense Coalition. She had risen through the ranks from a young ensign on a patrol cruiser to the commander of the first expeditionary armada, the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled. She had fought pirates, suppressed rebellions, and faced down threats that would have broken lesser officers. But nothing had prepared her for the endless bureaucracy of peacetime command. She sat in her chair on the bridge, reviewing reports on her tablet, when the communications officer spoke up. "Admiral, we are receiving an emergency transmission. Origin point is the Corvani system." Vasquez looked up with mild interest. The Corvani were one of the older species in the galaxy. Peaceful, advanced, and generally uninterested in humanity. They had exchanged diplomatic pleasantries a few times over the centuries, but nothing more. "Put it through," she said. The message played through the bridge speakers. It was garbled at first, degraded by the enormous distance it had traveled. But the translation software cleaned it up quickly, and the words became clear. "This is Elder Matriarch Sarail of the Corvani Collective. Our world is under attack by the Vethkai swarm. Our defenses have fallen. Our allies have abandoned us. 30 billion of our people face extinction. We ask for help. We beg for help. If anyone can hear this message, please come. Please." The bridge went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and looked at the speakers, as if the voice might continue. But there was only static. Vasquez sat very still. The Vethkai. She knew that name. Everyone in Earth's military knew that name. The devouring swarm. The species that had consumed 100 worlds. The unstoppable force that even the great empires of the galaxy refused to challenge. They were the nightmare that every defensive strategist had feared since humanity first ventured into the stars. "Play it again," Vasquez said quietly. The message repeated. The same words. The same desperate plea. The same voice, tired and afraid, asking for help that would never come. Commander Wei Chun, the executive officer of the Prometheus, stepped closer to the admiral's chair. He was a tall man with a calm face and careful eyes. He had served with Vasquez for 15 years and knew her better than almost anyone. "Admiral," he said, keeping his voice low, "the Vethkai swarm has an estimated fleet strength of 40,000 vessels. Some estimates put it even higher. We have 600 ships in the Armada. I am aware of the numbers, Commander. Velanther Prime is 14,000 light-years away. Even at maximum warp speed, it would take us approximately 11 days to reach them." Vasquez did not respond. She was staring at her tablet, where she had pulled up the intelligence files on the Vethkai. The images were horrifying. Worlds stripped of life. Cities reduced to rubble. Bodies piled in streets, half consumed, left to rot. "Admiral," Chun continued, "I understand that this is a difficult situation, but we need to be realistic. The Corvani will be dead long before we could possibly arrive. Even if we left right now, at maximum speed, we would be too late. I know. And even if we could get there in time, we would be facing a force that outnumbers us 60 to 1. Our ships are powerful, but they are not miracle workers. We would be throwing away the lives of 150,000 men and women for nothing. I know, Commander." Vasquez's voice was flat, emotionless. "I know all of this." She stood up from her chair and walked to the great window at the front of the bridge. The stars stretched out before her, cold and distant. Somewhere out there, on a world she had never seen, billions of innocent people were waiting to die. "Get me Admiral Kowalski at Earth Command," she said. The connection was made within minutes. Admiral Stanislaw Kowalski was the supreme commander of all human military forces, a gruff old man who had been a friend and mentor to Vasquez for decades. His face appeared on the main screen, looking tired and concerned. "Helena," he said, "I assume you received the Corvani transmission." "I did." "Then you know what the situation is. I have already received messages from 3 different alien governments warning us not to interfere. They say that any intervention would be pointless and would only anger the swarm. I am not particularly interested in what the aliens think, Stanislaw. Kowalski sighed. Neither am I, but the fact remains that we cannot help the Kobani. They are too far away, and the enemy is too strong. I wish things were different, but they are not. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice careful and measured. What if distance was not a factor? Kowalski's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The Cascade Drive. The bridge went even more silent than before. Every officer stared at the Admiral with expressions of shock and disbelief. The Cascade Drive was humanity's greatest secret. It had been developed 30 years ago by a team of brilliant scientists who had discovered a way to fold space itself, allowing ships to travel vast distances in an instant. The technology was revolutionary. It was also incredibly dangerous. The energy requirements were enormous. A single cascade jump could drain the power reserves of an entire fleet. The navigation calculations were impossibly complex. Even a tiny error could send a ship into the heart of a star, or scatter it across 1,000 light years, or simply erase it from existence. No human fleet had ever attempted a full armada cascade jump. The risk was considered too great. The Cascade Drive was reserved for emergencies only, and even then, it was used with extreme caution. Kowalski stared at the screen for a long time. Helena, you cannot be serious. I am completely serious. A cascade jump with 600 ships? Do you have any idea how dangerous that would be? If the calculations are even slightly off, you could lose the entire armada. You could lose everything we have built over the past 3 centuries. I know the risks. Then you know that I cannot authorize this. The potential for disaster is too high. We would be gambling with the lives of 150,000 people on a mission that has almost no chance of success. Vasquez turned to face the screen directly. Her eyes were hard, but there was something else in them too. Something that Kowalski had not seen in a long time. Stanislaw, listen to me carefully. 30 billion people are about to die. 30 billion innocent civilians who have done nothing wrong. Their only crime is that they exist in a galaxy that has decided they are not worth saving. I understand that, Helena. But we cannot. The Kobani sent messages to every civilization in the galactic arm. Every single one. Do you know what responses they received? Condolences. Expressions of sympathy. Warnings to surrender and hope for mercy. Not one species was willing to help them. Not one. Because helping them is impossible. The Vethkai are too powerful. Nothing is impossible. Vasquez's voice rose slightly. That is what the galaxy does not understand about us. That is what they have never understood. We are not like them. We do not calculate odds and accept defeat. We fight, even when the odds are against us. Even when victory seems impossible. We fight. Kowalski was silent for a long moment. On the bridge, the officers watched the exchange with bated breath. Helena, Kowalski said finally, even if I authorize this mission, even if you somehow survived the cascade jump, you would be facing 40,000 enemy ships with 600. The mathematics are simple. You would lose. Maybe, or maybe the Vethkai have never faced an enemy like us. Maybe they do not know what humans are capable of when we are fighting for something that matters. You would be fighting for strangers. People you have never met. People who have never done anything for humanity. Elder Matriarch Serail had stopped counting the days. Time had lost all meaning in the Citadel. The shields flickered constantly now, their golden glow growing weaker with each passing hour. The power reserves were nearly depleted. Food was running low, and the Vethkai ships still hung in the sky, patient as death, waiting for the moment when they could finally descend and feed. She stood at her window, as she did every night, watching the darkness above. The amber sky of Valenthor Prime was gone now, hidden behind a layer of smoke and ash that blocked out the sun. In its place was an endless black, broken only by the green glow of Vethkai engines. There were so many of them. Thousands upon thousands of ships, stretching from horizon to horizon. The main hive ships were the largest, each one the size of a small moon. Their organic hulls pulsed with a sickly light, and from their sides emerged an endless stream of smaller vessels. Fighter craft and troop transports and things that had no names in any civilized language. Malohar. In the depths of the citadel, 30 billion Corvani waited for the end. The children had stopped crying days ago. They had grown numb to the fear, their young minds unable to process the horror that surrounded them. They sat in corners with blank eyes, clutching toys that would soon be as dead as they were. The adults tried to comfort them, but there was no comfort left to give. In the council chamber, the arguments had finally stopped. Councillor Morik had collapsed from exhaustion 2 days ago. Councillor Vela had not spoken in hours. Even Councillor Harek, who had been so insistent on sending the message to humanity, sat in silence, staring at nothing. There would be no rescue. There would be no miracle. The humans had not responded, and even if they had, they were too far away to help. The galaxy had made its decision. The Corvani would die, and no one would save them. Cyril accepted this. She had made her peace with death long ago, during the first years of the siege. What she could not accept was the fate of her people. The children who would never grow up. The scientists who would never complete their research. The artists who would never finish their masterpieces. All of that potential, all of that beauty, would be consumed by the endless hunger of the swarm. She was thinking about this when the universe ended. It began as a sound. Though sound was not quite the right word. It was more like a vibration, a trembling in the fabric of reality itself. Cyril felt it in her bones before she heard it with her ears. The window in front of her began to crack, thin lines spreading across the glass like spider webs, and then the sky tore open. Cyril had witnessed many forms of faster-than-light travel in her long life. She had seen the elegant spirals of Corvani phase gates, swirling patterns of light that opened gentle doorways between stars. She had watched the shimmering portals of the elder races, ancient technology that bent space with careful precision. She had even observed the crude bubble drives of younger species, which created small pockets of warped space around their ships. What she saw now was none of those things. A wound appeared in the sky. There was no other word for it. It was as if some giant hand had reached down and torn a hole in the universe itself. The edges of the wound blazed with colors that Cyril had never seen before, colors that had no names in any language she knew. Energy poured out of it in waves, washing over the planet, making the shields flicker and the ground shake. The Vethkai fleet froze. For the first time since they had arrived, the endless swarm of ships stopped moving. Their hive mind, the collective consciousness that connected them all, was trying to process what it was seeing. It had no reference for this. It had no understanding. In all the worlds it had consumed, in all the species it had destroyed, it had never encountered anything like this. From the wound came fire. The first ship emerged like a bullet fired from a gun. It was wrapped in plasma, its hull glowing white-hot from the violence of its passage through the tear in space. It was not beautiful like Corvani ships, not elegant or graceful. It was a block of metal and weapons, brutal and functional, designed for one purpose only. War. Another ship followed. Then 10, then 100. They poured through the wound in reality like water through a broken dam, each one burning with the energy of its impossible journey. They spread across the sky in formation, precise and disciplined, their weapons already charging with power. Cyril counted them as they came. 100. 200. 300. The number kept growing, and still they came, ship after ship, until the sky was filled with them. 600 ships. 600 human warships hanging in the darkness above Velanthur Prime. In the citadel below. The Corvani looked up through their windows and saw something impossible. They saw hope. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral Helena Vasquez allowed herself exactly 2 seconds to appreciate that her entire fleet had survived the cascade jump. The navigation calculations had been perfect. Every ship had arrived in the correct position. It was a miracle of mathematics and engineering, and if they survived this day, it would be studied by scientists for centuries. But there was no time for celebration. The tactical display on her screen was filled with enemy contacts. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. The Vethkai fleet surrounded the planet like a swarm of locusts, and at their center was the largest ship Vasquez had ever seen. The command hive. The brain of the swarm. If they could destroy that, the rest of the fleet would fall into chaos. But first, there was something she needed to do. Open a channel to the Vethkai fleet, she said. Her communications officer looked at her with surprise. Admiral, they do not respond to communication attempts. They have never, I know. Open the channel anyway. All frequencies. Make sure they can hear me. The channel was opened. Vasquez stood from her chair and faced the window, looking out at the endless sea of enemy ships. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. Attention Vethkai Swarm. This is Admiral Helena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Coalition. You have attacked the civilian population under our protection. You have committed acts of genocide against an innocent species. You have ignored all laws of civilized warfare. She paused, letting her words carry across the void. You have exactly 60 seconds to withdraw from this system. If you do not comply, we will engage and destroy your fleet. This is your only warning. The bridge was silent. Every officer watched the tactical display, waiting for a response. The seconds ticked by. 10, 20, 30. Commander Chun stepped closer to the Admiral. Ma'am, they are not responding. I did not expect them to. At 50 seconds, the Vethkai gave their answer. From every hive ship in the fleet, fighter craft began to launch. Thousands of them, then tens of thousands, then more than the sensors could count. They formed a wall of organic death, their weapons glowing with deadly energy, and they began to move toward the human fleet. Vasquez smiled. It was not a kind smile. I hoped they would choose this option, she said. All ships, weapons free. Engage at will. The Battle of Velanthur had begun. The first volley was devastating. Human ships did not fire elegant beams of light or precise bursts of energy. They fired nuclear missiles, hundreds of them, screaming across the void toward the Vethkai formation. The warheads detonated in sequence, creating a wall of fire that consumed everything in its path. 10,000 Vethkai fighters died in the first 30 seconds of the battle, but the swarm did not care about losses. It did not feel fear or pain or regret. It simply absorbed the destruction and kept coming, sending more and more ships against the human fleet. For every fighter that died, 2 more took its place. For every wave that was destroyed, another wave followed. The Prometheus shook as enemy fire struck her shields. Warning alarms blared across the bridge. Damage reports flooded in from every section of the ship. Forward shields at 70%, the tactical officer reported. The enemy is focusing fire on our position. Of course they are. We are the flagship. They want to cut off the head. Vasquez gripped the arms of her chair as another impact rocked the ship. Helm, bring us about. Target the nearest hive ship. All batteries, fire. The Prometheus rotated, bringing her main weapons to bear on a Vethkai hive ship that was easily 20 times her size. The guns fired, sending a continuous stream of thermonuclear warheads into the enemy vessel. The organic hull cracked and burned under the assault. Internal explosions tore through the ship's structure. And finally, with a burst of green flame, the hive ship died. A cheer went up across the bridge. But Vasquez did not celebrate. "One down," she said grimly. 39 to go. And several thousand smaller vessels. "Keep firing." Around her, the fleet was fighting with everything it had. Captain Yusuf Rahman of the destroyer Defiant led a squadron of 12 ships in a direct assault on a Vethkai carrier. The enemy vessel was launching fighters as fast as it could, filling the space around it with death. Rahman's ships flew straight into the swarm, their point defense systems working overtime to destroy the incoming craft. One by one, his escort ships were destroyed. The Resolute went first, her reactor breached by a lucky hit. Then the Steadfast, rammed by a Vethkai fighter that sacrificed itself to take her down. Then the Guardian, the Protector, the Vigilant. Rahman kept going. His ship was burning, her hull cracked in a dozen places, her crew fighting fires on every deck. But he did not stop. He did not turn back. "Target the carrier's engine cluster," he ordered. "All power to forward weapons." "Captain, if we do that, we will not have enough power to escape." "I know." The Defiant's guns blazed. The carrier's engines exploded in a ball of green fire. The massive ship began to tumble, out of control, crashing into the vessels around it. The chain reaction destroyed 3 other hive ships and hundreds of fighters. Rahman watched from his burning bridge, a smile on his face. "That is how you do it," he said quietly. Then his reactor went critical, and the Defiant became a new sun, taking another 1,000 enemy vessels with her into the darkness. Across the battlefield, similar stories were playing out. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim of the cruiser Vigilance found herself defending a convoy of Corvani refugee ships. The civilians had been trying to flee the planet when the battle began, and now they were caught in the crossfire, helpless and terrified. Kim positioned her ship between the convoy and the enemy fleet. She had no support, no backup, just one damaged cruiser against a swarm of Vethkai fighters. "All weapons, continuous fire," she ordered. "Do not let anything through." The Vigilance fought for 97 minutes. Her shields failed after 20. Her main weapons went offline after 40. By the 60th minute, she was firing with backup batteries and jury-rigged systems. Her hull held together by emergency force fields and prayers. Kim lost half her crew in those 97 minutes. She watched friends die at their stations. She felt the ship shudder with each impact. But she did not move. She did not retreat. She stayed between the convoy and the enemy, and she kept fighting. When her engineer reported that the reactor was about to fail, Kim made a decision. "All hands, abandon ship," she announced. "Get to the escape pods." "That is an order." Her bridge crew looked at her with confusion. "Captain, what about you?" "Someone needs to fly this ship into those bastards." "Now go." They went. The surviving crew evacuated in escape pods, picked up by Corvani vessels that rushed to help. And Sarah Kim, alone on the bridge of her dying ship, aimed the Vigilance at the heart of the Vethkai communication nexus. The explosion disrupted enemy communications across the entire sector. For precious minutes, the swarm lost coordination, their hive mind fragmenting into confusion. And in those minutes, the human fleet gained ground. On the surface of Velanther Prime, the Corvani watched the battle unfold. They saw the human ship so small compared to the Vethkai hive vessels, charging directly into the enemy formation. They saw explosions bloom across the sky, human and alien alike dying in the darkness. They saw acts of sacrifice that made no sense. Ships throwing themselves into certain death to protect strangers they had never met. Elder Matriarch Serail stood at her window, tears streaming down her silver face. She did not understand these humans. She could not comprehend why they were doing this. They had nothing to gain. They had every reason to stay home, to protect themselves, to let the Corvani die. But they had come. They had answered her desperate message. They had crossed 14,000 light-years of space, risked their lives, sacrificed their people, all for a species they barely knew. She watched as another human ship exploded, its crew dying in a flash of nuclear fire. And she wept. Not for herself. Not for her people. For them. For the humans who were giving everything to save a world that was not their own. 6 hours into the battle, the mathematics began to shift. The Vethkai had lost 18,000 ships. Humanity had lost 300. The swarm's coordination was weakening, their hive mind overwhelmed by the chaos of human tactics. The fighters attacked from unexpected angles. The capital ships refused to follow predictable patterns. Every time the swarm thought it understood what the humans were doing, they did something different. It was maddening. It was impossible. It was working. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral Vasquez reviewed the tactical display. She was bleeding from a head wound, and the bridge around her was half in flames. 3 of her officers were dead. The ship's main computer was barely functioning. But they were winning. "Commander Chun," she said, "what is the status of the command hive?" Chun checked his console. "Still operational. It is moved to the center of its formation. Heavy escort, at least 5,000 ships between us and it. Then, we need to clear a path." She opened a fleet-wide channel. The surviving ships, 243 vessels, heard her voice one last time. "All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. Form up behind the Prometheus. We are making a direct run on the command hive. Maximum speed. All weapons on my mark." The response was immediate. The remaining human fleet aligned itself into a single formation. A spear of steel and fire aimed directly at the heart of the swarm. Engines pushed beyond their limits. Shields flickered and failed. Hulls cracked under the strain. But they kept going. The Vethkai command hive tried to flee. It was too slow. The humans were coming, and nothing could stop them. "Fire," Vasquez said. 243 ships fired simultaneously. The concentrated barrage struck the command hive's shields like the fist of an angry god. The shields held for exactly 4 seconds. Then they collapsed. All ships ramming speed. The human fleet struck the command vessel at near relativistic speed. The impact created an explosion visible from the planet's surface. A new sun bloomed in the darkness, consuming the swarm's leadership and 40% of its remaining forces in an instant of nuclear fire. Admiral Halaya Vasquez died with a smile on her face. She had done what she set out to do. She had answered the call. She had proved that humanity would come when no one else would. And in the citadels below, the Kovani watched as the remaining Vethkai ships scattered into the void like frightened insects, leaderless and broken. The battle was over. They had won. The explosion that destroyed the command hive lit up the sky like a second sun. Elder Matriarch Serail shielded her eyes from the blinding light that poured through her window. For a moment, she thought the citadel shields had finally failed, that the end had come at last. Then she realized what she was seeing, that it was not destruction. It was victory. The massive Vethkai command vessel, the brain that had controlled the entire swarm, was gone. In its place was an expanding cloud of debris and radiation, still glowing with the fury of the impact. And around that cloud, the remaining Vethkai ships were in chaos. Without their central command, the swarm had no direction. The hive mind that connected every vessel, every fighter, every individual creature in the fleet had been shattered. Some ships continued to fire, their weapons lashing out blindly at targets that no longer made sense. Others simply stopped moving, drifting aimlessly in the void. And others still, the ones with enough individual intelligence to understand what had happened, began to flee. They scattered in every direction, abandoning the siege they had maintained for so long. The sky that had been black with enemy ships was suddenly empty. The green glow of Vethkai engines faded into the darkness. And for the first time in weeks, the stars became visible again. Serail fell to her knees. She had lived for over 800 years. She had witnessed empires rise and fall. She had seen wonders that most beings could not imagine. But she had never seen anything like this. She had never seen the impossible become real. Below her, in the depths of the citadel, the Kovani people were beginning to understand what had happened. At first there was silence, as if they could not believe what their eyes were telling them. Then someone shouted. Then another. And suddenly, the citadel was filled with the sound of voices, crying and laughing and screaming with joy. They had survived. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything the galaxy had told them. They had survived, but not everyone was celebrating. Serail wiped the tears from her silver face and looked up at the sky. The human ships were still there. What remained of them? She could see them on the tactical displays that still functioned in the council chamber. Small dots of light scattered across the darkness. There were so few of them now. She remembered watching the battle unfold, seeing the human vessels throw themselves at the enemy with reckless abandon. She remembered the explosions, so many explosions, as ship after ship was destroyed. She remembered the final charge, when the entire remaining fleet had formed itself into a spear and driven itself into the heart of the swarm. How many had died? How many men and women had given their lives for a people they had never met? "Get me a communication link to the human flagship," she ordered. A young officer rushed to obey, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. "I am trying, Matriarch. But the human fleet's communication network is heavily damaged. I am having trouble establishing a connection. Keep trying." It took nearly an hour to establish contact. When the connection finally went through, the face that appeared on the screen was not what Serail had expected. It was a young woman, barely more than a child by Corvani standards. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood. Her face was covered in ash and burns. And her eyes, her dark human eyes, were filled with a grief that Serail recognized all too well. "This is Commander Wei Chun of the UNS Prometheus," the woman said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been shouting or crying or both. "Acting Commander," she added after a pause. "Acting Commander?" Serail felt a cold sensation in her chest. "What happened to Admiral Vasquez?" Chun was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her words were heavy with pain. "Admiral Vasquez died in the final assault. She stayed aboard the Prometheus to ensure the collision trajectory held. She said it was important, that someone had to make sure it worked." Serail closed her eyes. She had never met this Admiral Vasquez. She had only heard her voice once in that brief transmission during the battle. But she felt the loss as if she had lost a dear friend. "I am sorry," she said. "I am so sorry." "Do not be sorry, Matriarch." Chen's voice hardened slightly. The Admiral knew what she was doing. She made her choice. They all made their choices. How many? Chen did not pretend to misunderstand. 79 ships survived the battle. Out of 150,000 personnel who made the Cascade jump, we have confirmed approximately 30,000 survivors. We are still conducting search and rescue operations. The final number may be higher. 30,000. Out of 150,000. More than 100,000 human soldiers had died in the skies above. Velanther Prime. They had died fighting an enemy they had no reason to fight, defending a people they had no reason to defend. Cyril did not know what to say. In all her centuries of life, she had never encountered anything like this. The great civilizations of the galaxy did not sacrifice themselves for others. They calculated risks and rewards. They made decisions based on logic and self-interest. They did not throw away their lives for strangers, but the humans had. "Commander Chun," Cyril said slowly, "I do not understand. Why did you come? You must have known what you were facing. You must have known how many of you would die. Why would you risk so much for us?" Chun was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her words would stay with Cyril for the rest of her life. "Because you asked for help, matriarch. Because you were in danger and no one else would answer. That is what humans do. We come when no one else will." The rescue operations continued for days. Human shuttles descended through the smoke-filled sky, their pilots risking their lives to evacuate survivors from damaged ships. Corvani medical teams rushed to help, offering their advanced healing technology to wounded human soldiers. Engineers from both species worked side by side to repair damaged systems and stabilize failing reactors. It was strange, this partnership between two species that barely knew each other. The Corvani were tall and graceful, their silver skin shimmering in the light. The humans were shorter and rougher, their bodies covered in scars and burns from the battle. But they worked together as if they had known each other for centuries. Cyril watched it all from her position in the council chamber. She had not slept since the battle ended. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the human ships exploding in the darkness. She heard the voices of dying soldiers, shouting orders and encouragement, even as their vessels burned around them. She had learned their names, as many as she could. Captain Yusuf Rahman of the Defiant, who had rammed his ship into a Vethkai carrier to save his squadron. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim of the Vigilance, who had held the line for 97 minutes with a skeleton crew. Ensign Maria Santos, who had been one of the last to evacuate the Prometheus, carrying 3 wounded comrades to the escape pods before making her own escape. So many names. So many stories. So many lives given freely for people they had never met. On the 3rd day after the battle, a human shuttle landed in the main square of the central citadel. Cyril was there to meet it, along with the surviving members of the Council of Seven. They had prepared a formal reception, with traditional music and ceremonial garments and all the rituals that the Corvani used to honor distinguished guests. The shuttle doors opened. A young human woman stepped out. She was wearing a uniform that was scorched and torn. Her face was streaked with ash and tears. She moved slowly, as if every step cost her great effort. But she stood straight, and her eyes were clear. Cyril recognized her from the communication screen. This was Commander Chun, the acting commander of what remained of the human fleet. Chun walked forward until she stood, directly in front of the elder matriarch. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. These two leaders of such different peoples. Then Chun spoke. "Matriarch Cyril, Admiral Vasquez asked me to deliver a message to you, in case she did not survive the battle." Her voice was steady, though Cyril could see the grief behind her eyes. "She said to tell you, this is what humans do. We come when no one else will." Cyril felt tears running down her face. She did not wipe them away. "Commander Chun," she said, "the Corvani Collective owes humanity a debt that we can never repay. You saved our world. You saved our people. You sacrificed over 100,000 of your own lives for strangers you had never met." She paused, searching for words that could express what she felt. "In all the history of our people, no species has ever done what humanity did today. You have shown us something we had forgotten, something we had lost in our centuries of peace and isolation. You have shown us what true courage looks like." Chun shook her head slightly. We did not do it for gratitude, matriarch. We did it because it was right. I know. And that is what makes it so remarkable. Sirael reached out and took Chun's hands in her own. The human skin was warm, so different from the cool silver of Kovani flesh. But the gesture was understood. From this day forward, Sirael declared, the Kovani Collective considers humanity to be our closest ally and dearest friend. We will share our technology, our knowledge, our resources, everything we have. We will stand by humanity in any conflict, against any enemy, and we will never forget what you have done for us. Chun nodded slowly. Thank you, matriarch. But there is something else we need. Name it. We need to take our dead home. Chun's voice broke slightly. Over 100,000 men and women die in your skies. Their families deserve to know what happened. Their names deserve to be remembered. Sirael squeezed our hands. Of course. We will help you recover every body, every piece of wreckage, every trace of your fallen. And we will build a memorial here on Valenthor Prime, so that our children and their children will always remember the price that humanity paid for our survival. The news of the Battle of Valenthor spread across the galaxy like wildfire. At first, the other species did not believe it. The Vethkai swarm, the unstoppable force that had consumed 100 worlds, had been defeated by a fleet that was outnumbered 60 to 1. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a lie. But the evidence was undeniable. The scattered remains of the swarm, fleeing to the darkest corners of the galaxy. The wreckage of the battle, still floating in the skies above Valenthor Prime. The testimonies of the Kovani survivors, who described the human fleet's arrival with something approaching religious awe. The great powers of the galaxy did not know how to respond. The Meridian Empire, which had refused to help the Kovani, sent a formal message of congratulations. It was filled with diplomatic language and empty praise, but beneath the words was something else. Fear. The humans had done something that the Empire had thought impossible. What else might they be capable of? The collective of free minds, which had calculated the odds of success at less than 1%, revised their models of human behavior. They had assumed that humanity would act rationally, would weigh the risks and rewards, would make decisions based on self-interest. They had been wrong. The humans had acted irrationally, throwing away thousands of lives for strangers they had never met. It made no sense. It was terrifying. Other species reacted in their own ways. Some sent messages of praise and respect. Some demanded explanations. Some immediately began upgrading their military forces, suddenly aware that they had underestimated humanity for far too long. And in the halls of power across the galaxy, diplomats and politicians asked the same question over and over. What do we do about the humans? On Earth, the reaction was very different. When the news of the battle reached home, there was grief. Over 100,000 men and women had died in a single day, the largest loss of life in human history. Families wept for lost sons and daughters. Communities mourned their fallen heroes. The entire planet entered a period of sorrow that would last for years. But there was also pride. Admiral Helena Vasquez became a legend overnight. Her final words, delivered to her fleet before the Cascade jump, were repeated in schools and government buildings and homes across the world. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Captain Yusuf Rahman, who had rammed the Defiant into a Vethkai carrier, was awarded every medal the United Earth Defense Coalition could give. His children accepted the honors on his behalf, standing straight and proud, even as tears ran down their faces. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, who had held the line for 97 minutes, was promoted posthumously to full captain. Her name was given to a new class of warships, the most advanced cruisers ever built. And across the planet, in every city and every village, People looked up at the stars and felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. Humanity was not alone in the galaxy. They were small and young and often violent, but they were also brave. They were willing to fight for what was right, even when the odds were impossible. And they had proven that even the greatest threats could be overcome. On Valenthor Prime, the recovery continued. The Corvani worked tirelessly to rebuild their world. Cities were reconstructed. Gardens were replanted. The dead were honored and mourned. And through it all, the humans stayed to help. They did not ask for payment. They did not demand concessions. They simply rolled up their sleeves and got to work, side by side with the Corvani, as if they were helping rebuild their own homes. Commander Chun led the effort on the human side. She had been promoted to Admiral, a rank she had never sought and did not want. But someone had to lead the surviving forces, and she was the senior officer still alive. Every night, she walked through the camps where the human soldiers rested. She spoke with them, listened to their stories, helped them process the trauma of what they had experienced. They had lost so many friends. They had seen so much death. Some of them wondered if it had been worth it. Chun always gave them the same answer. "Look around you," she would say. "Look at the Corvani children playing in the streets. Look at the families reuniting after weeks of separation. Look at the city lights coming back on, one by one. We did that. We saved them. And that is worth any price." She believed it. She had to believe it. Because if she stopped believing, she was not sure she could keep going. On the 7th day after the battle, a Corvani child approached Chun while she was walking through the central square. The child was young, barely old enough to speak, with silver skin and wide eyes that reflected the amber sky. "Are you a human?" the child asked. Chun crouched down to meet the child's eyes. "Yes, I am. My mother says humans saved us. She says you came from very far away to help. That is true." The child tilted its head. Why? It was the same question the adults asked, the same question the galaxy asked. Chun had given many answers, some simple and some complex. But for this child, she gave the simplest answer of all. Because you needed help. And we could help. So we did. The child thought about this for a moment. Then it nodded, as if this answer made perfect sense. "Thank you," the child said. And then it ran off to find its mother, leaving Chun alone in the square. She watched the child go, and for the first time since the battle, she smiled. This was why they had come. This was why they had fought. This was why over 100,000 of them had died. For a child who could say thank you. For a world that would live on. For a future that would exist because humanity had chosen to answer the call. It was enough. It had to be enough. Yes, such a simple answer. I have thought about it every day since then. Cyril looked at the memorial, at the endless rows of names. In all my centuries of life, I have studied many species. I have learned their philosophies, their religions, their ideas about the meaning of existence. Most of them believe that survival is the highest value. That the purpose of life is to continue living, to protect oneself and one's family and one's species. That is not an unreasonable belief. No, it is not. But it is not what humanity believes, is it? Chun was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, choosing her words carefully. We believe in survival. We want to live. We want our children to grow up and have children of their own. But we also believe in something else. We believe that there are things worth dying for. Love, honor, justice, the protection of the innocent. She paused. We believe that how you live matters as much as whether you live. Cyril nodded slowly. That is what I thought. And that is what makes you so remarkable, Admiral. Not your technology. Not your weapons. Not your cascade drive or your nuclear missiles. It is your willingness to sacrifice. Your ability to look at a hopeless situation and choose to fight anyway, not for yourselves, but for others. She turned to face Chun directly. The galaxy does not understand this. They think you are reckless, irrational, dangerous. They fear you because they cannot predict you, because you do not follow the rules they have followed for millennia. But I understand you now, and I want you to know that the Kovanni will stand with humanity, no matter what comes. Not because we owe you a debt, not because of politics or trade or military alliance, but because you have shown us what it means to be truly good. Chun felt tears in her eyes. She did not wipe them away. Thank you, Matriarch. That means more than you know. They sat together for a long time, watching the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. In the years that followed, the galaxy continued to change. Humanity grew in power and influence, not through conquest, but through example. Other species began to look at them differently, to question the assumptions that had guided their civilizations for millennia. Some began to adopt human values, to teach their children that there were things worth fighting for beyond simple survival. The Vethkai swarm never recovered. The few scattered remnants fled to the darkest corners of the galaxy, hiding from a universe that now knew they could be beaten. Occasionally, a small raiding force would appear, attacking isolated colonies. But they were always destroyed, often by coalitions of species that had once been enemies but now worked together to protect each other. The Kovanni became humanity's closest allies. They shared their technology and their knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. Their scientists worked alongside human researchers to develop new advances that benefited both species. Their children grew up learning human languages and human history, playing games invented on Earth, singing songs from a distant world. And every year, on the anniversary of the battle, both species paused to remember. On Earth, ceremonies were held in every city. Families gathered to honor their lost ones. Veterans of the battle shared their stories with young people who would carry those memories forward. The names of the fallen were read aloud, 120,000 names, a list that took all day to complete. On Velanther Prime, the memorial was visited by millions. Kovanni and humans stood together around the white pillar, laying flowers at its base, whispering thanks to the dead who had given everything. And in the quiet moments between the ceremonies, people looked up at the stars and thought about what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. 20 years after the battle, a human child visited the memorial with her grandmother. The child was 8 years old, born on Velanther Prime, to human parents who had chosen to stay and help with the reconstruction. She had grown up surrounded by Kovanni friends, learned to speak their language as fluently as English, played in gardens that bloomed with flowers from two worlds. Her grandmother was old now, her hair white and her steps slow. But her eyes were still sharp, and her voice was still strong. "Grandma," the child said, looking at the pillar with its endless names. "Did you know any of them?" The old woman nodded slowly. "I knew many of them, sweetheart. I served with them. I fought beside them. Were you scared?" "Yes, very scared. But you came anyway." "Yes, we came anyway." The child was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she asked the question that every child eventually asked. "Why?" The grandmother smiled. It was a sad smile, filled with memories and loss and pride. Because someone needed help, and we can help. That is what humans do. We come when no one else will. The child nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then she reached out and took her grandmother's hand. And together they walked through the garden, past the white pillar and its 120,000 names, into a future that existed because humanity had chosen to answer a call for help. Above them, the amber sky of Velanther Prime stretched on forever, clear and beautiful and at peace. And in that peace, The memory of the fallen lived on, not as a burden, but as a light, a reminder that the universe was not as cold and empty as it sometimes seemed. That even in the darkest moments, when all hope seemed lost, there were those who would come to help. They were humans, and they would always answer the call. This was the legacy of Valenthur. This was the truth that would endure across centuries and millennia, long after the last witness had passed away, long after the details had faded into legend. When the stars themselves had abandoned a dying world, humanity had come. And they had not come for glory, or for power, or for reward. They had come because it was right. They had come because someone needed to. They had come because that is what humans do. And the galaxy would never forget it. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Valenthur. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Vethkai swarm, once the most feared force in known space, had scattered to the far corners of the universe. Their hive mind was shattered, their numbers reduced to a fraction of what they had been. Experts estimated it would take them centuries to recover, if they ever did. But the swarm's defeat was not the biggest change. The biggest change was how the galaxy now looked at humanity. Before Valenthur, humans had been considered a minor species. Young, primitive, violent. They had barely achieved interstellar travel. Their technology was crude. Their lifespans were short. Most of the older civilizations had dismissed them as curiosities, interesting but ultimately irrelevant. After Valenthur, everything was different. Delegations arrived at Earth almost daily. The great powers of the galaxy, the ancient empires that had ignored humanity for centuries, now sent their finest diplomats to establish relations. They came with gifts and trade agreements and offers of alliance. They came with praise and flattery and carefully worded questions about human military capabilities. They came because they were afraid. The humans had done something impossible. They had crossed 14,000 light years in an instant, using technology that no other species possessed. They had fought against odds of 60 to 1 and 1. They had sacrificed over 100,000 lives for strangers they had never met. No other species in galactic history had ever done anything like that. The Meridian Empire was the first to request a formal alliance. Their ambassador, a tall creature with 4 arms and skin the color of bronze, stood before the united Earth Council and delivered a speech filled with praise for human courage and virtue. The humans listened politely. Then they asked a simple question. Where were you when the Corvani called for help? The ambassador had no answer. The alliance was declined. Not with hostility, not with anger, but with a simple statement that humanity preferred to choose its own friends. The message was clear. We will not forget who stood with us and who stood aside. Other species received similar responses. The collective of free minds, the Voluntary Union, dozens of minor powers who had refused to help the Corvani. They all came to Earth seeking partnership with the victors of Valenthur. They all left disappointed, but not everyone was turned away. A small delegation arrived from a species called the Tazari. They were a young race, barely 1,000 years into their interstellar age. Their world was poor, and their technology was limited. They had nothing to offer humanity except their friendship. But they had done something that the great powers had not. When the Corvani had sent their distress call, the Tazari had responded. They had no military to speak of, no ships capable of reaching Valenthur in time. But they had gathered every resource they could spare and sent them to the Corvani, knowing that they might arrive too late, knowing that their contribution would make no difference in the battle. They had sent help because it was the right thing to do. The humans welcomed them with open arms on Valenthur Prime. The reconstruction continued. The cities that had been damaged during the siege were being rebuilt, not as they had been, but better. New technologies were being integrated, some from the Corvani archives, some from human engineers who had stayed to help. The floating platforms that held the cities now had stronger shields, better power systems, defenses that would make any future attack far more difficult. But the biggest change was in the Tovani people themselves. For 10,000 years, they had been a peaceful species. They had avoided conflict, preferring diplomacy and trade to war. Their military had been small and defensive, designed only to protect against minor threats. They had believed that peace was the natural state of the universe, that violence was a primitive impulse that civilized species had evolved beyond. The Vethkai had taught them otherwise. And the humans had taught them something even more important, that peace was not something that happened on its own. It had to be defended. It had to be fought for. And sometimes, fighting for peace meant being willing to sacrifice everything. The Kovani began to rebuild their military, not to wage war, but to ensure that they would never again be helpless. They trained their soldiers in human tactics. They studied human weapons and adapted them to their own technology. They learned the lessons that humanity had written in blood, and they remembered. Always. They remembered. Elder Matriarch Cyril made sure of that. She had retired from the council 6 months after the battle. Her centuries of leadership had earned her the right to rest. But she did not spend her retirement in quiet contemplation. Instead, she dedicated her remaining years to one task, ensuring that the sacrifice of humanity would never be forgotten. She wrote histories. She gave speeches. She visited schools and told children the story of the battle, of the humans who had come when no one else would. She became the keeper of memory, the voice that would carry the truth across generations. Never forget, she would say. Never forget what they did for us. Never forget what it cost them. And never, ever believe that you are alone in the universe. Because when the stars themselves abandoned us, the humans came. The memorial was built in the center of the capital city. It was a simple structure by Corvani standards. Just a pillar of white stone, rising from a circular platform surrounded by gardens. The stone came from Earth, quarried from a mountain near the city where Admiral Vasquez had been born. It had been carried across 14,000 light years and placed here, on the world that she had died to save, on the pillar, carved in letters that would endure for 10,000 years, were the names of every human who had died in the battle. 120,000 names, arranged in neat rows that covered the entire surface of the stone. It took visitors hours to read them all. Many came every year, walking slowly around the pillar, running their fingers over the carved letters, whispering names they would never forget. At the base of the pillar, in the old Kovani tongue, was a single phrase: when the stars themselves abandoned us, the humans came. Admiral Wei Chun attended the dedication ceremony. She stood at the front of the crowd, wearing her formal uniform, looking at the monument that would stand for millennia. She thought about the people whose names were carved into that stone. She had known many of them. She had served with them, eaten with them, laughed with them. They had been her friends, her comrades, her family. Now they were gone, but they were not forgotten. After the ceremony, Chun walked through the gardens that surrounded the memorial. They had been designed by Corvani and human gardeners working together, a blend of alien flowers and earth plants that somehow looked perfect together. The air was filled with scents from two worlds, mixed into something new and beautiful. She found a quiet spot and sat down on a bench. The amber sky of Velanter stretched above her, clear and peaceful. It was hard to believe that this same sky had been filled with fire and death just 6 months ago. A figure approached. Chun looked up and saw Elder Matriarch Cyril walking toward her, moving slowly with the careful steps of the very old. "May I join you, Admiral?" Chun stood and offered her seat. "Please." They sat together in silence for a long moment. Two leaders who had seen too much, who had lost too much, who understood each other in ways that words could never express. Finally, Cyril spoke. I have been thinking about something you said to me. On the day we first spoke after the battle, I asked you why humanity had come to save us. Do you remember what you said? Chun nodded. I said that you asked for help, and we could help, so we did.